Hello guys, welcome the best novel episode 5. 3 years later, the people of Ababil awoke that morning preparing for the looming danger just a few days away. Paying tribute to the Jatham organization, this was a ritual that occurred at the start of every new year. Villages would offer large sums of money along with tons of the earth's bounty, wheat, fruits, and more, to avoid trouble with the organization. That year, however, the village of Al-Jasasa was unable to gather the required tribute. Faced with this dire situation, the village elders, led by their chief, Sheikh Hammam, convened to find a solution to the crisis. Because the decision they were about to make could determine the village's survival or demise, Sheikh Hammam decided to allow all villagers to participate in the decision-making process. The sheikh began to speak. It has been a harsh and barren year. The skies withheld their rain, most of our livestock perished, and the earth gave us barely enough to stave off hunger. He added, his tone tinged with fear. The Jatham are coming to Al-Jasasa. As he uttered these words, he could see the dread in the eyes fixed upon him. He continued, when they arrive and find no tribute waiting, they will make us wish we had died of thirst and hunger instead. An impassioned young man shouted, we fight them. Either we destroy them, or we give our lives as tribute. The other youths eagerly supported his stance, their cheers filling the air. However, one of the elders, named Shalesh, cautioned them. Our enemy is armed to the teeth, while we are but unarmed men. He then raised his frail arms and added, the only weapons we have are these hungry bones. The young men, undeterred, insisted on the option of confrontation. This forced Shalesh to confront them with a grim reality. You are still young and think war is a game you can toy with. Have you not considered what will happen to your families after you die? Without giving them a chance to respond, he answered his own question. Your women will be enslaved. Your children will be sold in slave markets, either to toil as laborers when they grow up or to serve as entertainment in houses of vice and pleasure. As the villagers listened in stunned silence, he shouted, and your corpses will litter the village streets, with no one to bury them in the earth. Over time, they will become a lavish feast for the hungry crows and hyenas. The meeting dragged on through the day, and by the end, the villagers were divided into two factions, one favoring peace and the other favoring war. It fell upon Sheikh Hammam to make the final decision. He declared, we will send a delegation to the king to request his assistance. If he agrees, we will have peace. If he refuses, then it will be war. The king's palace, Tagine, was located on an island called Al-Arbab. For security reasons, Tagine closed all the ports overlooking the island and announced that anyone who dared to sail toward it, no matter who they were, would become a target for his soldiers. Because of this, Sheikh Hammam and the dignitaries had to first go to the village of the witches, as it was the only port where boats could safely sail to the island. As soon as the dignitaries arrived in the witches' village, they headed to the house of the village's leader, an old, hideous-looking woman named Shawar. She greeted them by saying, there's a condition you must fulfill before we listen to your request. She then pointed toward a young woman standing nearby and said, this beautiful Bakana. Sheikh Hammam, puzzled by the unusual demand, asked, what about her? We want her to have a partner for the night. He responded, we did not come for this, and we are in a hurry, Shawar. But Shawar, as if ignoring his words, declared, her partner will be you, Sheikh of Jasasa. If you refuse, take your men and leave. The members of the delegation exchanged confused and astonished looks. Sheikh Hammam then stood up, announcing his acceptance of the condition. Before he entered the hut where he was supposed to meet the girl, the leader of the witches' village warned him, do your best, Sheikh. 9 months from tonight, if the girl does not give birth, she will be killed. The situation inside the hut was extremely tense, and Sheikh Hammam didn't know how to handle the ridiculous predicament he found himself in. The girl stood at the door, waiting for instructions. The sheikh turned to her and observed her. She was a striking beauty, flawless in appearance, but he saw in her eyes a fear that resembled that of a chicken staring at a butcher's knife, knowing its end was near. He said, do not be afraid, my girl. Come and sit here. The girl approached and sat on the edge of the bed, as he had instructed her. What is your name, child? He asked. Feiruz, my lord, she stammered. Shall I bring you some water, Feiruz? Sensing his kindness, she pleaded. I beg you, my lord, save me from these filthy witches. From your words, I gather you are not from this place. Are you not a witch like them? No, the witches of this village remain virgins and do not marry. Then how do they reproduce? They kidnap girls like me and throw them into the arms of passing men, like you, my lord. 9 months later, they take the child if it's a girl, and if it's a boy, if it was a boy, they would bury him alive, she added. As for the mother, they either kill her or offer her to passing men. They won't release her unless she gives birth to a baby girl for them. And what do they do with the baby girl? They adopt her to become a witch like them when she grows up. The elder stared into her eyes for a while, eyes that reflected the flames of the candles lighting the hut. He said, having discovered something clearly in them, I see love in your eyes. Only those who have known love recognize it. She replied, since you've seen what is in my eyes, by the Lord, do not touch me, for I belong to him. And where is the one you love? I don't know, but if I leave this place, I will know how to find him. The elder, Hammam, pondered the girl's condition and felt pity for her. Would the witch Shawahar accept if I ransomed you with money, my child? Would you really do that, sir? Yes, I am the elder of the village of Al-Jasasa, and I have plenty of wealth. In truth, he had nothing but 3 gold coins borrowed from elders of neighboring villages, which he had vowed to use only in times of utmost need. He lied to her so she wouldn't feel ashamed. Follow me. Hammam left the hut with Feiruz behind him. When the head witch of the village saw them, she immediately realized that nothing had happened between them. Anger overtook her, and she shouted, don't you know how to complete your mission, elder? Hammam handed her a small bundle of cloth and said, this is the price for the girl. Shawahar looked inside the bundle and then asked, why do you want to ransom her? What concern of yours is that? Isn't the payment in your hand enough for you? I'm not a trader of women, elder of Al-Jasasa. Either you give me a reason to be satisfied, or take your money and leave with your men. Hammam was 70 years old, yet he had never married. His abstinence from marriage was an old story, one he had struggled hard to bury in the graveyards of memory. He had sworn never to tell anyone, hoping it would help him forget. But as the years passed, he learned that humans do not have the luxury of forgetting ended love stories. All they can do is coexist with the truth of their ending. He once told himself, anyone who claims to forget is either lying or never truly loved. Shawahar interrupted his reflections, saying, we are waiting. It's an old story, Shawahar. Then tell it to us if you want to ransom the girl. Though he had sworn to keep the story secret, if telling it would help the girl, he would break his vow for her sake. He began, in the past, my father, known as Shaheen ibn al-Sama, was the elder of the village of Al-Jasasa. We had a shepherd named Noah, and he had a daughter my age. Sheikh Shaheen ibn al-Sama was blessed with only one son, Hammam. This made him extremely protective, forbidding Hammam from venturing outside. Thus, young Hammam had no choice but to amuse himself within the household. Among the household members was Noah, the shepherd, who had a daughter close in age to Hammam. She became his companion in play, laughter, and conversation. Naturally, a bond of affection and childhood attachment developed between them. As time passed, this love deepened in their hearts. When Hammam reached manhood, he approached his father to ask for his blessing to marry the shepherd's daughter. But Sheikh Shaheen refused outright and, with an uncompromising tone, declared, the children of nobles marry nobles, and that shepherd's daughter should find herself a goat to marry her. The next day, to protect his son, Sheikh Shaheen expelled both the shepherd Noah and his daughter, not just from the house, but from the entire village. He threatened them, saying, death will be your fate if either of you returns to Al-Jasasa. Hammam fell into deep sorrow. He not only loved the girl, but he had grown used to her presence, making her absence unbearable. Determined, he searched for her until he found her in a neighboring village. Their reunion filled his heart with joy, leaving him almost speechless. Overwhelmed, he struggled to find words to express his happiness. He stood before her like a mute poet trying to recite verses to his beloved, who had returned from the clutches of absence. The first words he managed to say were, let's run away. But she replied firmly, no, Hammam, I won't bring shame to my father. You won't bring him shame. We'll run away to get married. Then why run away? Because, as you know, my father will oppose our marriage. And who will I leave my father to? He needs my care and service. Your father will find a way to manage. Please agree. Neither of us can live without the other. She remained silent for a while, prompting him to urge her. I need an answer. The shepherd's daughter appeared torn, caught between her love for Hammam and her duty as the sole caregiver for her aging father. Hammam, on the other hand, saw the matter from one perspective only, fighting for their love. Yet, he didn't want to force her. He wanted her to make the decision herself. I will wait for you tomorrow night at the well near our village, he said. If you come, we'll run away. If you don't, then it's the end between us. The next night, Hammam went to the well and waited for her, but hours passed, and she didn't come. Each time despair crept in, and he considered leaving. His heart told him, stay, she might come and not find you. He waited for 3 nights, but she never came. He returned home, knowing her answer. Years passed. Hammam lived a long life, but it was filled with bitterness. He hated her and, because of her, came to despise all women. Months and years passed, and Sheikh Shaheen, the son of the sky, passed away. After his death, Hammam became the leader of Al-Jasasa. More months and years rolled by until one day, fate willed Hammam to encounter someone during one of his journeys. The man looked familiar. Hammam approached him and asked, "You are Noah, the shepherd, aren't you?" The shepherd, who had gone blind with age, replied, "And you are Hammam. I recognized your voice." A brief conversation ensued between them. Hammam wanted to ask about the shepherd's daughter, not out of longing, but curiosity about what had become of her. No matter how much time passes, a man often wishes to know the fate of the woman his heart once cherished. Yet his pride held him back. Noah, perceptive as ever, sensed the turmoil in Hammam's heart and said, "She did not fail you, Hammam, but an unfortunate event kept her from reaching you." The shepherd then explained what had happened. "My daughter returned that day full of joy, saying you had found her after your father had banished us from the village. She sought my permission to leave with you, saying you had promised to marry her." My eyes teared up as I remembered that day. She was so overjoyed, Hammam, that I couldn't deny her wish to spend the rest of her life with the man her heart had chosen. Hammam asked anxiously, "What happened then?" The shepherd continued, "That night, while she was on her way to the well where you awaited her, Sheikh Shaheen, the son of the sky, intercepted her and killed her. To cover his crime and ensure you wouldn't discover the truth, he buried her body far from sight and sent his men to kill me. However, these men were my friends. They had worked with me in the same household. They informed me of what had happened to my daughter and advised me to flee. I heeded their advice and escaped. The men returned to their master and reported that they couldn't find any trace of me. Upon learning the truth, Hammam swore never to marry. Since that day, he has devoted himself to helping every heartbroken woman he encounters, as if he sees a reflection of his lost love in each of them." When Hammam finished his tale, the matriarch of the witches' village handed him back his money and said, "You lovers are pitiful. Love kills you, and yet you remain loyal to it." She then turned to Feiruz and said, "From this moment you belong to the sheikh. Do as he commands." When Feiruz became Hammam's, the first thing he did was to free her from servitude. He told her, "Find the one who awaits you." Then he added, "I have one request, my daughter. Your wish is my command." "Sheikh, what do you ask?" "If you ever have a daughter, name her after the woman I loved." "What was her name, my lord?" "Her name was Sarabi." Feiruz smiled and promised him, "If I ever have a daughter, her name will be Sarabi." After Feiruz left and departed from the witch's village, Shawayar turned to Sheikh Hammam and said, "Now, you may tell us your request. Why do you wish to meet His Majesty, King Tagine?" The dignitaries of the village of Al-Jasasa, led by Sheikh Hammam, boarded a wooden boat given to them by the matriarch of the witches' village. They were delighted as they set off for the Island of Lords to meet the king. Little did they know the disaster that awaited them there. Later, when the village dignitaries stood before King Tagine, they bowed in reverence and remained humbled until the chamberlain called out to them, "You may now look upon His Majesty's face." They all raised their heads, gazing at him with awe and respect. Sheikh Hammam sought permission to speak, and when allowed, he began, "Great king, you are aware of the hardship our land is enduring, and we—" King Tagine interrupted, "Why waste time on formalities? Sheikh, speak plainly." "Your Majesty, it's about the Jatham organization." "What about them?" "At the start of every new year, they force us to choose between two fates, death by their swords or death by poverty, hunger, and thirst. We now toil all year just to meet their demands for tribute. If this continues, it will lead to our destruction." King Tagine, with his dreamy blue eyes and handsome face, loved to sit on his throne, watching his subjects complain about their miserable lives. He derived immense satisfaction from observing their frail and pitiful appearances, as it made him feel more powerful. "You know our guards have long been trying to eliminate Jatham, but they haven't succeeded yet," the king said. "However, I want you to return to your village and assure them that in the coming days, we will put forth greater effort to defeat them." Daring to step 2 steps closer to the throne, Sheikh Hammam suggested with a friendly tone, "If you command your witches, they could capture them." Anger began to seep into Tagin's heart. The sheikh had overstepped his bounds, meddling in matters beyond his place. Yet, the king replied with feigned calm, "The witches, sheikh, serve me and me alone. But, your Majesty, what harms your people harms you." The king leapt from his throne, exclaiming, "Do not compare me to anyone. I am your god, Hammam, your god and none other." Sheikh Hammam shrank back into silence. He was not afraid of the king's wrath, having lived long enough that the thought of death no longer frightened him as it once did. What he truly feared was that the king might refuse to help his people, leaving them at the mercy of the Jatham organization when they came in a few days to find no tribute. Desperate for his village, Hammam pleaded, "I beg you, help us." "Help yourselves," Tagin retorted. "How? When you've forbidden us from having weapons?" "That is not my concern. You are responsible for protecting your people. You are the king." Tagin, his anger intensifying, revealed what he believed about himself, saying, "I am your god, and I alone decide what I do." Realizing the futility of arguing further, Hammam responded, "Then let us agree on one thing. You and I both know you are no god." Tagin warned him, "Repent to me, Hammam." He raised his voice and declared, "I am your one true god. You are nothing more than a pile of dung," Hammam retorted before turning and walking away. Anger consumed the tyrant Tagin after the insult he received from the sheik. Determined to retaliate with a harsher blow, he commanded his guards, "Arrest him and the elders of his village, and execute them." In the vast courtyard before the palace, the executioner began beheading the elders of Al-Jassasa village one by one. When it was Hammam's turn, Tagin approached him, whispered something in his ear, then turned to the executioner and ordered him to sever Hammam's head. Hammam's head rolled to the ground, his lifeless features etched with a look of shock, as if stunned by the secret he had just heard. Tagin muttered to himself. I whispered to him, "I cannot stand against Al-Jatham, Hammam, not because the Ababil couldn't capture them as I had told you before, but because I and Nab al-Fil are one and the same. I am the head of the Al-Jatham organization." The next day, fearing that Al-Jassasa would rise against him once they learned what he had done to their elders, Tagin summoned two of the most terrifying and ruthless leaders of the Al-Jatham organization, Bar and Ayub. In a tavern located in a distant place, a young man in his late 20s sat on a stool beside the wine counter. He was tall and slender, with sharp, fierce facial features that seemed borrowed from an eagle. His name was Bar. Across from him sat another young man with dark skin, appearing about 2 or 3 years younger. He was taller, broader, and heavily muscled. Despite his ferocity and imposing presence, he looked like a handsome ogre. His name was Ayub. They had been sitting there for over 3 hours, drinking wine in silence and contemplation. Every time one of their glasses was empty, the tavern's plump waitress would refill it. The place was quiet, not because it was empty, but because Bar and Ayub had killed every customer in the tavern. They hadn't done it out of anger or provocation, but purely for amusement. Their silence stretched for another hour until Bar sighed and said, "I'm bored. Want to entertain ourselves by killing the waitress?" Ayub asked. The waitress gasped. "No," Bar replied. "Who would serve us if we killed her?" "Then what's wrong? What's the point of continuing this life if we're just going to die in the end?" "You're right. Do you want to die?" "No, but I'm seriously considering it." "Let me know before you do anything." "Why?" "So I can join you. Life without you would be dull." They fell silent again and continued drinking wine. Their intoxication began to take hold. After a while, Ayub remarked as though realizing something, "Well, damn, you and I are definitely going to hell." "That's even better," Bar replied. "All our friends are there. Heaven would bore us." They both burst into a fit of laughter so intense that Ayub fell backward with his chair, stirring up a cloud of dust as he hit the ground. Ayub, still lying on the floor and mistakenly thinking it was his friend who had fallen, asked, "Are you hurt?" "No, not me. But perhaps you should ask the earth if you hurt it with your fall," his friend replied. Ayub smiled, realizing that he was the one who had fallen. He said, "Bear, come down here. I want to talk to you. Why don't you come up instead?" Bear asked. "Coming down is easier for you," Ayub replied. "You're right," Bear said, then pushed himself backward with his chair, toppling onto the ground to sit across from Ayub. "So, tell me, what's on your mind?" Ayub had something on his mind for a while, something he had resolved to keep even from those closest to him. But now, with the influence of wine, his thoughts spilled out. "What do you think happens to us after death?" "I don't know. I've never met anyone who died and came back to tell us," Bear replied. "And God? What about him? Do you believe in God, in hell, in heaven, as the monks say?" Ayub asked. Bear lowered his voice as he responded, "I believe God isn't a tyrant." Then he laughed out loud, but after a few moments he realized he was laughing alone. "What's wrong? Why aren't you laughing? Should I get you more wine?" Bear teased. "I'm serious, Bear," Ayub said, repeating his question. "Do you believe there's a God?" "I told you, I don't know," Bear replied. Silence lingered between them until Ayub broke it, speaking candidly. "I want to quit." Bear's face showed no surprise, though Ayub had expected it. Instead, Bear asked calmly, "Why?" "I want to meet my mother," Ayub said. "But she's dead," Bear responded. "All mothers go to heaven, and I want to meet her there." "That means you do believe what the monks say," Bear said. "I believe there's someone who put us on this earth, and that we'll meet him after we die, and he'll ask us about what we've done. Those who do good will enter heaven, and the rest will go to the place where our friends are." Bear remained silent, offering no comment. Ayub asked, "Don't you have any beliefs about what happens after death?" "I believe the worms will be very happy with you when you die, you big, meaty man," Bear joked. This time, both of them laughed together. When their laughter subsided, Ayub asked, "Don't you want to quit working with the organization?" Before Bear could answer, someone entered the tavern. It was the messenger sent by Tagin. He was surprised to see the two leaders sprawled on the floor like that, but he masked his astonishment and delivered his message. The elephant's tusk requests your presence immediately. The sea, Bar, asked. Why is he asking to see us at this hour of the night? What happened? The messenger recounted everything that had happened since the arrival of the village elders, right up to the moment of their beheadings. Bar whispered to his friend, let's go to see him now, and I'll answer your question later. After the three of them left the place, the plump tavern keeper abandoned her work and ran toward her village, Al-Jasasa, to share what she had overheard. To suppress any possibility of rebellion that the men of Al-Jasasa might launch in the future, Tagan decided to prepare a troop of 300 warriors from the Jatham organization. Their mission was singular, to kill all the males of the village. To ensure the mission's success, he appointed Bar and Ayub as its leaders. That was the reason he had summoned them that night. Time passed heavily for the people of Al-Jasasa village. They were anxiously awaiting news from Sheikh Hammam and the elders who had gone to the king's palace. However, a long time had passed without any word. Suddenly, strange rumors began spreading everywhere, their source unknown. The rumors claimed that the king had beheaded Sheikh Hammam and all the elders. The youth were outraged by these rumors, vowing revenge. However, the village's wise men tried to discredit the claims, suggesting they wait a few more days to confirm the truth. But by dawn of that very day, the doubts were shattered when 300 warriors, bearing the banners of Jatham, launched a devastating attack on the villagers. The men of the village tried to resist and defend themselves against the assault, but the battle was heavily one-sided. The 300 warriors fought with swords and spears, deflecting the villagers' modest wooden clubs with their solid iron shields. The situation was dire, and the village's men were on the brink of annihilation. The news of the attack reached the ears of Jabbar al-Abatira, who ordered his family members to take refuge in the forest and not leave it for any reason. Everyone obeyed his command, except for Jumana. When she learned what was happening, she left her chamber unnoticed and sneaked into the village to check on Rahana. She arrived at Metham's house, searching inside but not finding Rahana. Initially worried, she remembered Metham's words. The thief always expects death at any moment. That's why I told her what to do if harm ever comes my way. Don't worry about her, she will know how to handle herself. But then a thought struck her. What if Rahana didn't know how to handle the situation? What if, somehow, she became involved in the war raging outside? Driven by this dark thought, Jumana decided to search for her in the village streets. During her search, she was deeply pained by the sight of what the Knights of the Jatham organization were doing to the village. Many times, she wanted to intervene and carry out quick rescues for some of the situations unfolding before her eyes, but she would always recall the promise she had made to her father to adhere to the family law. The law that prohibits the use of force in front of humans. So, she refrained from helping and continued with her mission. She searched tirelessly. When she could find no trace of Rahana, she wished from the depths of her heart that the little girl was safe. Then, she turned to head back toward the dark forest. But she had barely taken her first step when a hand belonging to one of the organization's knights reached out and grabbed her. That knight's name was Ghaffran, and the only part of his massive armor-clad body visible were his eyes, shining through the slit of his iron helmet. Despite all the barriers and defenses he surrounded himself with, she was capable of killing him and freeing herself. Yet, she refrained, bound by her commitment to the law. Her only reaction was to scream, a natural response to what was happening to her. Her scream caught the attention of Commander Bar. When he turned to her and saw the terror in her hazel-brown eyes, he felt an unfamiliar sense of pity, a strange feeling for him, as he had never experienced mercy before. Ghaffran, let the girl go. Ghaffran, who had never seen a girl of such beauty before, refused to obey his commander. She's mine. I found her first, and I'll add her to my other women. Commander Bar was the only member of the Jatham organization who fought without armor or a helmet concealing his head, so his features were clear to Jumana. Despite his harsh facial expressions, she saw a glimmer of hope in him. She pleaded, please, tell him to let me go. I beg you, let her go, Ghaffran. We didn't come here to steal women. Ghaffran silenced her by pressing his dirt and blood-stained hand against her mouth. He then hoisted her onto his horse as if she were war spoils and replied defiantly to his commander, "That's not going to happen, Bar. I'm taking her." At that moment, Bar swiftly turned on Ghaffran and, without warning, thrust his sword through the eye slit of Ghaffran's helmet. The blade pierced his eye socket and exited the back of his skull, even penetrating the helmet's iron wall. Jumana was horrified at the sight of blood gushing from Ghaffran's head. Bar reassured her. "Don't be afraid." He carried her with one arm and seated her behind him on his horse. "Hold on to me tightly. I'll get you out of here." He intended to help her escape, but he couldn't. The Knights of the Jatham organization, upon witnessing their commander kill one of their own over a girl, considered this an act of ultimate betrayal. They immediately decided to rebel against him and carry out an execution. They surrounded him, swords drawn. One of them exclaimed, "Has this girl bewitched you, Bar, for you to kill Gofran over her?" Bar knew what he had just done was indeed treason. He also realized that no amount of justification would convince them otherwise. The only way out of this mess, born of his impulsiveness, was through direct confrontation. He shouted, "Ayub, where are you? I need you." Behind the knights of the Jatham order appeared a majestic, black-clad knight who cut through the ranks with his sword and shield until he stood beside his friend. As he observed the death surrounding them from every direction, he said, "The view from here is terrifying." Bahar replied, "You can still retreat." Ayub smiled, revealing white teeth and one golden tooth. The Black Knight never abandons his friend. Then, the battle began. Bahar and Ayub displayed enough skill and prowess to hold their ground, but after a long period of attack and defense, exhaustion began to set in. As they continued fighting, Bahar, growing weary, said, "It seems our end is near." Ayub, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dragged you into this." "Don't apologize, my friend. It would be an honor to accompany you to hell." The battle raged on, and the Knights of the Order resorted to treachery to end the fight. One of them launched an arrow toward Bahar and Ayub. The arrow struck Bahar's right thigh, piercing his femoral artery and causing severe blood loss. This quickly weakened his defense. As Bahar sensed impending defeat, he turned to Ayub and said, "Take the girl and run. I'll cover you until you escape." "No, we'll stay together until the end." "Listen to me." "No, I won't leave you." Gradually, Bahar started losing focus and awareness due to the massive blood loss. When Jumana noticed this and saw the extent of the sacrifice the commander made for her, she decided to break the family law and use her special powers to save the situation. Her hair and eyes glowed deep red. She grabbed Bahar's clothing as he lost consciousness and then turned to Ayub, extending her hand. "Take my hand." Ayub, busy fending off the attacks of the Knights of the Jatham Order, did not understand the strange request and continued fighting, ignoring her outstretched hand. She yelled, "Take my hand." When he finally took her hand, the three of them disappeared from the midst of the battle. They reappeared in a distant, deserted, and safe cave. Ayub asked in terror, "How did you do that?" "I'll explain later," she replied urgently while pressing her hand on Bahar's bleeding wound. "We need to save him quickly. His body has lost too much blood." Jumana, naturally, was unfamiliar with much about human anatomy. This led her to suggest, "Perhaps he will heal if we remove the arrow from his." Ayub corrected her. When a fighter is struck with an arrow or spear, his body becomes punctured at that point, and the arrow or spear acts like a plug that reduces the bleeding. Jumana understood. "A blood plug? So, if we pull out the arrow from his thigh, it will open." "Yes, that's why he continued fighting in the battle without removing the arrow from his thigh." "What should we do?" she asked. Ayub, a man of war, was not knowledgeable enough to offer medical treatment. All he could do in that moment was tear off a piece of his shirt and wrap it around the wound before saying, "We need to summon a healer to see him." On her way to find a healer, Jumana passed through many villages. She thought it would be easy, but it turned out to be quite the opposite. The healers would first ask about the identity of the injured person, ensuring they did not risk treating an outlaw. She answered honestly, "He is one of the Jatham." Upon hearing this, the healers were split into two groups. The first would politely refuse to help, while the second, and more common, would slam their doors in her face, sometimes after cursing or spitting at her. Thus, she moved from village to village, region to region, encountering the same treatment every time she sought help. Eventually, her path led her back to the village of Al-Jassasa. Contrary to what she had expected, the village was quiet and calm, as if silence and stillness blanketed the entire place. It seemed as though the knights of the organization had retreated or had been swallowed by the earth itself. Intrigued, she went to the site of the battle to investigate and saw an astonishing sight. All the members of the organization had been wiped out. As she stood there, stunned and contemplating what had transpired, a voice came from behind. "Princess Jumana." She turned to see her father's advisor, Kaisarin, kneeling on one knee and bowing her head respectfully. "Thank the heavens you are safe, Your Highness." "What happened here, Kaisarin? Who destroyed them?" The advisor stood upright and began explaining. "Our spies reported what happened to you. They said a member of the organization kidnapped you. Your father and some warriors set out to rescue you, but when they arrived, you were nowhere to be found. Fearing the worst, they decided to eliminate all members of the Jatham." Jumana, voicing her concern, said, "People will talk about what happened, and Nab al-Fil will find out. Do not worry. The elders of the family have made a decision." "What decision?" "All witnesses will be given the elixir of forgetfulness. That way, Nab al-Fil will know nothing of what transpired." Jumana turned and prepared to resume her mission. Kaisarin asked, "Will you not come, Your Highness?" "No, I have things to do. The area is not safe. Nab al-Fil may send spies to gather information. Jumana was unfazed by this. With the new strength she had gained from her father's training, she felt confident in facing any potential danger. "I will be fine," she said, adding with authority, "Return to my father and reassure him. He must be worried about me by now." "As you command." Jumana then headed directly to the home of the healer in the village of Al-Jassasa and knocked on the door.